We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Hey, if you have any specific guest or topic requests that you want us to cover on one of our shows, or really any of our shows, you can submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and filling out the form. We review those on a regular basis, and we'll reach out to you once we've reviewed. Also, exciting to announce our next live webcast will be on March 18th. That's the day after St. Patrick's Day. Hangovers notwithstanding, we'll be broadcasting 11 a.m. Eastern Time and you can learn how to prepare Linux hosts for unexpected threats. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register now. Also, of course, if you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're all available on demand for your viewing pleasure and you can get there by going to securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right. We already touched on it a little bit. I posted a couple stories just sort of kick off the conversation for the second half. They're in the show notes. I think they're underneath my profile. And Priya had alluded to a couple of them. And I don't know if there's any particular order we want to pick up on. But where we left off from the first segment was sort of wondering about, how to make the law work for us, how to make the law be a positive thing in terms of cybersecurity. I don't know if we'll get around to compliance today or not, and how compliance would or would not or can or cannot play a role. We did bring up the Florida water treatment facility issue of a month or so ago, and the challenges there because it's a public sector. But I guess my opinion in general from a compliance perspective, and I'll shut up after that and we'll get back to talking to Priya, that for many companies and organizations in the private sector, and probably even in the public sector as well, stuff doesn't happen unless you're required to do it by regulation or compliance standard. We just haven't gotten to the point as a society where we're going to do this thing called security because it's the right thing to do. We're motivated by doing what's cheap. Motivated. A little bit too much of the juice here.
Drink more.
Drink more, but
totally drink more.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
We'll drink more, especially tomorrow. But how does the law help in terms of regulation and compliance? Is there a difference? Is there a difference between private and public sector? Let's jump back into it. Take it away, Priya.
Right. Well, so I think one of the, a great example of why lawyers cannot do this on our own is I am bewildered that all of you have my background as your background. And the only explanation I have for how you did that is magic, right? And the idea that somebody like me who, went to fancy schools and has had, quite a great career would be in charge of dealing with compliance or regulation on security issues when I basically learned to double click last week is preposterous, right? And so the question is there, one question we all have to tackle is there still a difference between private and public? When you talk about impact, for example, the coronavirus is a great example. Does it matter if half the people in a company get coronavirus versus half the people in a community, right? It's the same, right? If you are working somewhere and all of your accounts have been compromised and your accounts are not limited to your company, right? You might have, like most people, bank accounts that you access online. You may have leaked just the way we've been breathing over each other and spreading this virus. Your little mom and pop company with its lack of cybersecurity defense may have caused you, the employee, to have leaked this virus all over, right? To every website you go to. You've unwittingly done it. You have no idea it has happened. We'll just keep using the metaphor. You're an asymptomatic carrier, right? Because people are not, back to your word silo, maybe we need a silo counter, because people are not siloed, right? People don't live just in their government job or in their private life. People are free flowing, right? We use, every single one of us uses some public institution at some point during the day, or even if you don't realize it, right? The people who demand less taxes, I'd say, well, do you use the roads, right? Like, did you use your Easy Pass? All of these are public institutions, and the post office, any of it. I think we have to stop thinking about this in this binary, it's either or, and we also have to stop thinking about it in terms of whose responsibility it is, because the impact is borne on everyone. The threat is to everyone. The risk is to everyone. So if you step back and you think about the countries who acknowledge that the health of their citizens is not an individual issue, in fact, no society can be that healthy if everyone isn't to a certain level of health. You have the same
herd immunity
view.
And you're talking about herd immunity, and you're talking about, wow, my background is effed up. I don't know where I got this background anyway. But you're talking about herd immunity. You're talking about, the collective efficacy, things like that, right?
I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about, a lot of the countries, like Australia is a great example. Australia is not a socialist country, right? But it has a very robust infrastructure where healthcare and education are paid for, because somebody sat down and did the math. Forget what you morally think about this, but somebody sat down and did the math and said, it is way cheaper for everyone to have healthcare and everyone to have education as a society. It costs us way more to have people who are uninsured and uneducated, right? People can, live, and they don't become enormous bombs of costs, right? As opposed to, little tiny events here and there we can all manage. And so if you think about the same thing with cybersecurity, right? If this was viewed as a national issue, right? What is not McDonald's costs or Microsoft's costs or your local coffee shop's costs of a cyber attack, but what is the national cost of something like that? Because as I said, that attack may infiltrate and penetrate all sorts of companies. Then you start thinking about it as, this is our issue, right, as a country, and then do we attack it from the way of thinking about insurance, right? Do we require people to have insurance? Is this the kind of insurance that is paid for by all the taxpayers, right? Because it is in everyone's best interest, our tax money currently goes towards all sorts of defense, right? Should it go towards this sort of defense? Because it does affect each person. These are major thought shifts that have to happen before we can start deciding how to regulate it. Part of what's so complicating this issue is the world of computers and cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, and all this has been tied intellectually to capitalism, right? In that it's property, it's worth something. If you were the person who discovered the widget or the way to do something, you can become the next Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. And decoupling that, right? And saying it's not just worth something in a positive way, but it's also worth something as a cost to everybody, I think is really important. Because once you have the capitalism flag waving over it, and it's like intellectual property, and this is partially why the silos in the government want to keep their secrets, right? Because the secrets are worth something, right? Microsoft keeps its secrets. Everyone wants to keep its secrets, but what is the cost to everybody of those secrets? And how do we then still give people an incentive to make money, right? How do you advance this? And you know, one thought I had, we have white hacker programs. Like, what if the world powers, like the climate accord, paid into, or at least agreed to pay into a fund where whistleblower hackers from all over the world, like let's say you got some Russian guy, we're gonna just pick on Russia for a second, Russia, is working with the team, and they have developed this amazing virus that is going to bring the world down, or America down, or New York down, and someone on that team realizes, if I call this whistleblower hotline, they might pay me out to report it, right? And it would be worth way more to me if I made this call than this group might get and give me my allot, or like however that works. We can incentivize that, right? Just the same way we're incentivizing the white hat hackers. There's lots of, if we break down the paradigms in which we think about these things, there's a lot of innovation in regulation, in compliance, in strategy that we can do, but we have to break those ideas down first. And
the other thing I like about Australia, and I'm sure it relates somehow, although I'm not sure why, is Australia. Well, there's that too. Australia requires all of its citizens to vote. You are fined if you do not vote. And you know, that in contrast with all the, whatever side you fall on, whether you believe it's real or not, voting regulations, voter suppression versus voter fraud, stuff that goes on here in the U.S. I have a random off-the-wall question for you, but I think it's you're covering so many complex, deep issues and concepts. Why is it that historically, at least in the U.S., I don't know if it's true in Great Britain or not, but historically in the U.S., I think it's the majority of people that get involved in politics. You can at least see it in the Congress, and very often, who becomes president. Why are so many of the people involved in politics? Do they start out as lawyers?
One of the reasons is that the government are the lawmakers. And so historically, the people, Abe Lincoln was a lawyer, right? I think a couple of the
Lincoln?
Adams were.
Yep, sorry.
And so they knew how to read the law, and they were there to try to write and change it. And so I think that's part of the draw. In that it does benefit society for a law to be well written. So I'll just give you guys a quick primer. Two of the biggest challenges to any new law, and the challenges really only come up when someone tries to apply the law, is that it's vague, right? It's written in a way that you have no idea. Like if I said it is illegal to be a jerk, right? And then I went and arrested one of you, and I said, you're a jerk. Like, you would say this law is void for vagueness because it doesn't define what that means. Like, no one can actually change their behavior in a way to be compliant with this law, right? And so it is, on one level, it is really helpful. Just the way I was saying, you can't really create cybersecurity policy without having a team of people who are just in that field, not lawyers who know a little bit about it, but people who are in that field. It's hard to write laws that are going to withstand the scrutiny of legal challenges if there aren't actually lawyers involved in the drafting of those laws. And that's who the people who draft the laws are government, elected government officials. And so it's helpful when they're lawyers. And often laws become unwieldy, draconian, useless when they're drafted by people who aren't lawyers, right? A lot of people get voted into office on platforms that are really reactionary, and then try to push forth legislation, which is, obviously just a word for laws in action, that are useless and unwieldy, and then they end up clogging up the system as opposed to actually dealing with whatever issue or behavior they wanted to deal with. So that's a very long answer to your question of why lawyers often end up in government.
Well, I appreciate that, because it's something I've often wondered. To pick up, what you're saying is sparking so many thoughts. I want to actually pick up on we mentioned Schoolhouse Rock and we sang the "I Am a Bill" song. But if you remember that episode, the problem that is trying to be addressed, if I recall from memory correctly, is the need for school buses to stop before they cross a railroad. At least that's what I can remember in the cartoon. And the larger thing was there somebody saw a need. There was a need to provide some sort of a law for safety, for public safety, for the common good. And I think simplistically or idealistically, that's why so many people allege to get involved in politics, because they want to do something for the greater good. And yet the jaded part of me says, yeah, but most of them are in it for themselves. And there's all the nature of politics seems to be what's in it for me, what's best for me. I think it was Ronald Reagan that expressed it. I don't know if he was the first one to do it, but in his campaign for re-election, he said, "You just have to ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" Maybe that was for his first election. That's how he beat Carter. And to me, that's the epitome of selfishness and greed, and not doing things for the greater common good. I'm jaded. I'm cynical. I don't see a positive outcome when we shift gears to the world of cyber and the fact that there are no borders, and the borders were politically created and economically created in the first place. Where do we go from here? But good. Somebody put up I'm going to watch that as soon as the show's over. We should all watch it together on the after party. The I Am a Bill episode. So, the other question that's been nagging me is, you're a criminal attorney. You're a criminal defense attorney, if
Correct.
I understand correctly. And yet you were talking about there's a need for a broader category of lawyer, the concept of patent lawyer. What other law is there? I mean, you're a defense attorney, you're a prosecutor, there's litigation, there's civil suits, there's criminal, and yet there's all these lawyers that get involved in government. Can you encapsulate for us lay people, what are the current sort of silos of law, if you will?
Yeah, so there's basically, I'll break it down simply. There's two types of lawyers. There's corporate lawyers who are deal makers, right? And in that you can call everyone from people who do mergers and acquisitions, who do like real estate deals and work on contracts, entertainment lawyers. Those are all corporate lawyers. They don't go to court. They work, they represent their own clients, but they work to try to make a deal, right, with someone else. And then on the other side of the world are litigators. And litigators are people who fight with another party over someone has accused someone else of doing something wrong. So, for example, if Microsoft and Apple were merging, you would have corporate lawyers who were working on that deal and papering up the deal and trying to make it, pass all regulation, blah, 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 blah. And then let's say something went wrong with that deal. Maybe somebody sued and said it violates the antitrust law. Then you have litigators who deal with the lawsuit happening in court. So corporate lawyers are people who don't go to court, and litigators are people who go to court and who who fight it out in court. So within those worlds, you have tax lawyers who give people tax advice, who would be on the corporate side. But then you also have, there's a specialty within law. You can get something called an LLM, which is an advanced degree. It's a master's of law available to people who already have a law degree. And one popular one people get is an LLM in tax, because tax is such a specific subject that even having passed the bar and taken the part on tax, you won't be an expert on it and be able to give the type of advice that somebody with an LLM in tax has. So, you could be a litigator who also has an LLM in tax. So someone gets indicted, let's say, on a criminal federal tax case, you might want someone who's a litigator and a trial lawyer and a defense lawyer who also has an LLM in tax. So those are sort of the broad categories. So then within litigation, if it's a criminal case, that means the government has accused you of breaking a law. If it's a civil case, anybody can sue anybody, including the government. So the government can sue you civilly, like the EPA might sue you civilly, or anybody can sue anybody else for alleging that you've wronged me in some way. And criminal defense lawyers specifically represent people when they're accused of crimes. And it is a very specific niche. I always tell people that it's not something you also do. It's something that you do. So just like you wouldn't go to your general practitioner and say, would you mind doing this brain surgery on me? You would go to a brain surgeon, because that's the thing they do. And you want someone who knows this inside and out. So that is an explanation of how lawyers work. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that did. I mean, we're all just going, just soaking it all in. Appreciate it very much. The one article that we mentioned very briefly about is it Southern Cal that's starting a cyber war, or a cybersecurity focused master's program, degree program. I wanted to come back to that real briefly, because you had said we need more people and I'm paraphrasing, in all walks of life, or at least people that are cybersecurity professionals, to learn the law. So are you encouraging all of us to sign up for that program? Are you eligible to take concentrations like that if you're not seeking a law degree? Maybe the answer is yes, because they'll take our money.
That program is for people who don't have law degrees. And I felt like a genius, because I was thinking about the topic. I was like, this would be a perfect program. And then I saw that USC had the thought before me, because having that degree would give you a leg up on other people, right? Like people who at the beginning of this podcast didn't know a lot of the things I say, are like, oh, well, now I might think about something sort of differently, right? And once you're armed with that knowledge, as I said, like the law moves at the glacial pace, right? What you learn in law school is not necessarily the law, but this would be a program that was more specifically about the law, but it's about how to think about law, right? It's how to understand an issue and break it down to figure out what's relevant, what's not relevant, how to, cast your argument and anticipate sort of counter arguments. It's more that you do learn some specific things, but it's a way to think. And that information, that knowledge, if that was sort of now I'm going to refer to the Matrix when he sits down and says, like, I need to know how to fly this helicopter, and he does, right? If you took the world's greatest hackers and they, were able to stick a wire in their brain and suddenly learn how regulations are, what the regulations are, how you create them, blah, 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 it would be such a game changer, right? And that would be the type of person that you would want on any team, right? You would want on a team of advisors to the government when they're creating regulation, because these people actually know what they're talking about, right? They know both parts. You would want, if you hired an outside consulting group, if you wanted to create a organization that vetted, I think Scott had referred to this, that vetted your chief technology officer, right? And created tests for them every 6 months to make sure they're actually up to snuff. That's who you'd want doing it, right? That's the group that would in a year or two of learning this master's program would be able to learn how to read new regulations and understand how they're going to impact this field. So I think that a program like that is not only a great idea, but I would like to see a trend where that becomes required for certain positions. That you just, I say to people all the time when they complain about the law to me, and I say, the law's working exactly the way it was intended to. Your objection isn't that the outcome. Your objection is you don't like the intent of it. So you should learn how laws are made so that you could have the impact on the level you want it to have, right?
But you could say the same thing about government too.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's like if you're voting for a candidate based on X, Y, and Z, but your complaints are A, B, and C, you need to understand the marriage between how A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z come together. Like, what's the alphabet in the middle, right? So, anyway, I
hear absolutely everything you're saying, and holy cow, that's a lot of information. My brain keeps going back to, well, if we're using laws from the 1930s, like the wiretapping law that you referenced in the previous episode, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch.
Segment.
Yeah. Segment. Yep. Thank you. I keep sitting here saying to myself, well, everything that we have our laws based on are resultant of well-established problems that have arisen. And that's how we have the precedence that's been set inside of a lot of the laws that we see today. Everything with cyber is brand spanking new. And the government, along with law, are always going to be playing catch up because there's no flexibility to be able to think ahead and see ahead on problems. We don't know what's going to arise. So how, Priya, do we overcome something like that as far as a gap?
So your question is an excellent one, and I'm going to blow your mind by asking sort of another question, which is this sort of circumstance has been encountered by the government many times. Most recently, I would say, is after the 9/11 attacks, right? After the 9/11 attacks, the US government essentially kidnapped a bunch of people, called them suspects, hid them in secret places. And then because the government felt that this was an emergency unlike any other before, it decided it is outside the law, not above it, but just outside it, and began torturing people, right? And came up with all sorts of justifications that, yes, we have the Geneva Convention that we signed on to. Yes, we have our own laws. Yes, we have our own procedures, but that does not matter right now. This is an emergency. And so we are going to act in real time. We are going to make decisions and we'll deal with the consequences later, right? And people can have different views of whether that was the right thing to do, whether torturing people was useful, whether it was effective, whether it was worth it, right? If you do the moral balancing scale of what we got from torturing people versus what it cost us as, collective soul, fine. But this is another circumstance like that. So I think that whoever answers your question, Scott, of like, what do we do? Because this is unprecedented, has to go back and look at that moment and draw some lessons from it, right? Like, this is not going to be torture, right? But it is going to be acting outside the law because the law cannot have been written until after. So,
well, I was going to say, Priya, I mean, you're sort of folding over the whole notion of we need to be future thinking and thinking outside of the box, but we're doubling down on the but the way the system is designed, whether it's the legal or the government, is to draw on the past, learn from the past, be reactionary to things that have already happened, and so once again we're sort of at that perfect storm of how do those two things work together, those diametrically opposed forces.
Yeah, and then I think part of the answer is a global committee that treats cyber events like natural disasters, right? That gives itself authority with the information from ethicists to computer experts to legal experts of what the boundaries of that authority are, but gives them real-time ability to react even when there is no law in place. And I think the understanding has to be that's for everyone's greater good, right?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because I've been looking for a place to ask for 40 minutes now. Do we need to have an international court of law, an international legal body? I mean, doesn't that already exist? Isn't there an international criminal court or something like that?
The Hague is the International Criminal Court, and there's actually a Hague, which is an IT group out of literally in that same geographic area that it works with multiple computer advocacy groups, I guess, around the world to put together standards and such so that they can interoperate. And then you've got ISO, which is the International Standards Organization, and groups like that. But it's not easy.
Hey, you're forgetting about ICANN.
Oh, well, as international as that gets.
I can't. I mean, it's true.
No,
Somebody fight me here.
Well,
so
we all need to fight this collective battle.
Functional international groups, right? There's the UN, which was founded in good intention, and it requires a buy-in, right? For it to be effective, you have to agree that it is an authority that can and will curb your behavior.
The problem is agree. That word right there doesn't happen in our industry.
Right. And there's the World Health Organization, there's the World Bank. There are world organizations, but I do think absolutely we need an international organization at the very least, because we are not at the forefront of these issues, right? And now I'm circling back. For 12 years we've been playing defense. Right? We should not be leading the charge. We need people who are ahead of us at the table, and we want to be invited to that table, but it's not our table, right? Those seats are claimed rightfully by, whether it's Russia, China, North Korea, you all know better who's the who's who in the hacking as of 1:15 on March 16th, 2021. That's who needs to be there, right? This isn't about GDP or anything else. This is a different resource. Your ability to pioneer and crack the code in the security world is going to be the next land grab. So.
All right. Well, very fascinating discussion. We've touched on so many complex issues, and I'm sure I speak for most of us when I say, wow, this is really depressing. But appreciate.
Thank you.
Oh my, come on, Jeff. It's not that bad.
But yeah, it is that bad, just because it takes so daggone long to make any of this happen. Just remember, in the early 90s, I was working at NSA, and we were operating off if I'm doing the math right, a 60-year-old wiretapping law to try to determine what the ground rules were for ethical hacking. Priya, thank you so much for schooling us, Schoolhouse Rock style. We ought to make a video with you sometime, Johnny. Make a note of that. Appreciate your time and your expertise and your knowledge, and that's going to wrap us for this week. We need to call it quits sometime, and we will be back next week. Don't know what the topic is yet, but we'll have something fun in store for all of us. So until next time, thanks for joining us.